Our next speaker, one of his least favorite things in the whole wide world is public speaking. But his absolute least favorite thing, well beyond public speaking, is to be introduced by me, because I tend to be hyperbolic. I use hyperbole. So in deference to Jerry's wishes, I will be absolutely brief. I've known Jerry for 20 plus years. His remarks, both public and private, have always been honest, provocative, and inspiring. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to our stage a pilot's pilot and a friend to aviators everywhere, the one, the only, Jerry Gregoire.
Thanks, son. Well, thank you all. We've said this several times. I'm going to say it one more time. Thank you again for coming. This is the third year we've put this event on. And it's always remarkable and humbling to me that we're able to gather such great heads together to meet and to talk about ideas and exchange ideas. And to be joined by such great companies. This event and the fueling experiment, we're joined by 29 other companies, but that's some talking. I want to tell you, get 29 companies. Most of them are on that chart on the wall that you see back there. And these are all companies, each one of them, that have made a very highly tangible commitment to aviation, and they deserve, I think they deserve our support. Last year, and we're going to do it again this year, we had a breakout session where we're going to have 5 breakout sessions, as you probably saw from the schedule. The breakout session that I'm going to be doing is the R&D one. And in that session, I had conversations with the breakout groups about what things the laboratory ought to be concentrating on in the coming year, so that when we came around to this year, we'd be able to talk about it. And I'm going to be talking about, there were a lot of things that came out of that session. 3 of the biggies were a look at, continuing to look at the helicopter simulator, which when we began that project about 2 years ago, I gave about a 15%, maybe a 20% chance of success. We did better than that. The other one was looking at methods to attract new pilots, and the other one was motion, because motion has become one of those topics that creates a lot of argument within the simulation and flight training community. And if you look at the aviation press, every once in a while an article will pop up that said, "Is motion really important?" Well, we have a fondness for motion in simulation, but it's always been difficult, and it was certainly impossible before we started the laboratory to really quantify the value of motion in simulation. And so among the things that we looked at this year was, what is the value of motion in simulation? So I'm going to be talking about that and how it applies to flight training and skills development. But first, I thought I'd take a minute to do some editorializing on a different subject, and it has to do with oh gosh, I'm way behind here. I hope I'm pushing there. There it is. The role of motion in flight simulation. I probably should put that up there first. But before I get to that, I'm going to talk about this for a minute, okay? Because I know that some of the folks in the audience think that was one of the craziest things that they ever heard of. I'm not a fan of a habit of many speakers have of opening presentations with a joke. And as a rule, I don't do that, but I'm going to break that rule this time. Because there's this story that we're fond of telling here around the Skyport Laboratory, and it kind of goes to the heart of what I'm going to be talking about. And I'll apologize right now because it's a very old joke, and honestly, it isn't all that funny either. But Fred is... I always found it funny. Many people don't find it funny, but Fred is in the habit of playing golf every Sunday afternoon. And on this particular Sunday, he got home from a round of golf much later than normal, and he looked very, very tired. And his wife said, "Did you have a bad day on the course?" And he said, "Well, everything was going fine. I was having the best round I'd had all year. Then Harry has a heart attack and dies on the 10th tee. And his wife says, "Oh, God, that's awful." And he says, "Yeah, you're not kidding it. The whole back nine, it was hit the ball, drag Harry. Hit the ball, drag Harry." And I feel like we do that around here sometimes. You know, one of the biggest mistakes you can make when you do anything public out in the open anymore, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, a good thing or a bad thing, or even a neutral thing, is to go out on the forums and the internet and read the blogs and the discussions on what they're saying about it. Because if you've got self-esteem problems to begin with, which, you know, I may or may not have, you know, it can be hard on you. Rod Beck said, "This has to be the absolute stupidest idea I've ever heard of yet, with the exception of the flying car." Now, I take exception to that because I think the flying car is way, way stupider than the avgas idea, okay? Way, way stupider. And then there was this really rather confusing and contradictory comment that says, "I don't think this is going to prove anything." And then he says, "This low-cost fuel thing primarily will affect people who are flying 10 hours a year and get them to fly 20 hours. Yeah! I mean, what? You know? Oh my God. I don't think this is going to prove anything, which of course was one of the things that we were testing for, and it did work. You know, pilots did start flying more. Pilots did, in the process of this, dust their planes off, fix whatever problems they had with it, and began flying again. So the question then is what's the lesson here? Will the aviation industry learn from any of this? Learn from these kinds of things? Well, imagine that you've got 5 costs associated. Like, there's lots more than 5, but kind of like 5 main costs. There's fuel cost, and there's spare parts, and there's training, and there's, you know, the cost of the airplane, and so on and so forth. And there's 5 costs associated with flying. And we at the Skyport had to figure out whether cost was really a driver. Now picture this for just a second. What would have happened had we reduced the cost of avgas down to $1 and nobody came? And everybody's theories about what's causing pilots not to fly was wrong. You know, the claptrap that you hear about why pilots aren't flying can be really stunning sometimes. Like, there are many other activities now. We have boating these days. You know, boating, there's always been boating. What do you mean there's boating, you know? But, and honestly, that would have worried me a lot if we hadn't seen a really, really big increase. Now, we didn't see a big increase. We saw an enormous increase. This, as you probably heard, this place pumps 4,000 gallons of avgas a month. We were pumping 8,000 gallons of avgas a day during those first 15 days. And so it was really gratifying to know that that worked, because what we did was we pulled one of those valves, one of those levers, those cost levers, and said, okay, what happens when we do this? And we didn't pull it a little. We pulled that lever all the way back to see what would happen. And we got a very, very interesting result. Now, can we do that again? I don't recommend it, you know. But damn oil companies. But here's what we know now, that we don't have to pull one valve all the way back. We can pull 3 or 4 valves part of the way back, and we're going to get those kinds of results. Pilots are going to come back to flying. And this is one of, and I hate to pile on because Roger did I mean, really, Roger, that was very unfair, all the things that you said up there. But this happened, I think, earlier this week or last week And Scott said that in the press, and I read that and I thought, well, you know what I thought. Raise your hand if you think Scott is talking about an airplane in this sentence. Very, very good. He's not talking about an airplane. And I knew he wasn't talking about an airplane when he said this either. So what I did was I ran this sentence through the Google translator, and here's what it said. General aviation can no longer sustain our growth profit margin expectations. Wish you all the best of luck. Now kindly kiss off. I mean, this is very, for me, this is very disheartening. It ought to be disheartening for general aviation, all of general aviation, and it's very disheartening to me because it's completely accurate to say that anything to do with designing, building, or supporting aircraft everything we do in aviation is the most hidebound, inefficient mess on the planet. To date, these inefficiencies have not been a problem that companies in aviation think they need to resolve, because the answer to the systemic inefficiencies in building airplanes and supporting airplanes and getting spare parts, the solution has always been raise the price, and people will pay it. And guess what? The elasticity in the market just snapped, and there is no more elasticity in the market anymore. Pilots are not paying it anymore. They're going away. And companies that decide that, hey, you can't meet our expectations as customers anymore, so we're going to leave you behind, is going to be the death of the industry. But I don't think that's actually going to happen, because I think under these kinds of stressors, the industry will find ways to make this workable again. And we are really getting a stomach full of it, just as we work with the Red Hawk and deal with the people that build these things like replacement parts. So we can invest the money now and fix things and ensure general aviation's future. Or we can walk away while we chase higher margin opportunities with other equipment for a while until the industry dies, and then there won't be any money to be made at all. The question is are we aviators or are we accountants? And the answer is we're aviators, and we're going to fix that. So I feel a lot better about that. So the role of motion in simulation and helicopters, I'm going to combine these two topics because they came out of the R&D sessions from last year. So the question is it important? And sometimes it's difficult for me to discuss this topic, not because we make motion simulators, we make non-motion simulators too, but it's tough for me sometimes to discuss this with a skeptic without wondering if the skeptic is simply putting me on sometimes, I mean, all of the highly refined scientific studies aside, and there are a lot of them. If you go to the FAA site, you can find 10,000 papers on studies on aviation, and maybe 1,000 of them have to do with motion. And 500 of them say motion is not important. 500 of them say motion is important. So pick your side, cherry pick your article, whatever you want to make a side. But the fact of the matter is that all those studies aside, that motion is important. The notion that motion is important in training is all around us, and we see it every day. I mean, have you ever wondered why no one has yet developed a simulator to teach a kid how to ride a bicycle? I mean, there's plenty of bicycle, simulations, like games, bicycle riding games and traffic safety trainers and stuff like that. But there's no simulator built to teach a kid how to ditch the training wheels. And you think of all the advantages for the kid and the parent. There's no more weather issues, no more skin knees, no more chasing a kid up the road, on the bicycle, And then about the time they get a little too cocky, you take the instructor's manual and you blow a tire on them, just to kind of see what happens, just like, that'd be great. Well, anyway, the reason you haven't seen one is because it would be so hard to build. And the cost benefit, return on investment on a project like that would be something only the government, could love. And the reason it's so hard to do is because it's so highly dependent on a very refined and precise motion. That's because you don't balance a bicycle by seeing that you're falling. You balance a bicycle by feeling that you're falling. And if you want some proof of this, take a look at this crazy. Let me see if I can move ahead. Take a look at this crazy guy. He's blindfolded. Now, he's having trouble keeping the bike level, but it's only because he's riding so slow. And he's riding slow because he's afraid he's going to run into something because he's blindfolded, okay? But he can feel that he is falling, and he can make the corrections that he needs to make as he goes. So learning to ride a two-wheeler, obviously in the case of a bicycle, learning to ride a two-wheeler is helped by the fact that bicycles are inherently stable. I mean, if you take a bicycle and you grab it and you push it down the road, I could probably push a bicycle and make it nearly to the door before it would fall over because, it's kind of inherently, it'll kind of stay upright. But keeping a bicycle upright is, let me make sure I've got these visuals in the right place, is simply a matter of feeling that you're falling, turning the wheel and keeping the mass of the bicycle underneath you. So you turn the wheel and you force the bicycle back underneath you all the time. But you do it subconsciously because it's just something that we're, for whatever reason, we're able to do with our brain and think about other things at the same time. And if you build a simulator that only had visuals, in this case, that would actually be detrimental because by the time you could see in the visuals that you were falling, it would already be too late and you will have already fallen over. Now, given the obvious challenges of building a single axis, bicycle simulator, imagine how difficult it would be to build a simulator for a dynamically unstable vehicle, such as a helicopter, where motion is not only required for roll, as it is with a bicycle, but also for pitch, yaw, heave, and an infinite number of combinations of all of these motions. The closest thing to a helicopter that I can think of is a unicycle. Now, does anyone here think that riding a unicycle is a visual exercise? If you do, take a look at this guy. Isn't that something? But now, by the way, if you suspect that he can see through that blindfold, trust me, he's watching the fire sticks. He's not watching whether he's falling or not, okay? So learning to hover a helicopter is commonly likened to standing on a basketball, and it's tough to do and even tougher to simulate, and it's why there are currently no satisfactory helicopter simulators on the market for less than $1 million. Now let me restate that. There are no helicopter simulators on the market under $1 million worth buying. And that's because training the three most difficult and dangerous and time-consuming maneuvers in a helicopter, namely hovering, ground reference maneuvers, and auto rotations, cannot be adequately learned in a non-motion device. I mean, once a real helicopter is well off the ground, for those of you who fly helicopters, once you get them up and get going, and you're going forward, and you're going somewhere, they fly pretty much like an airplane. But, which not surprisingly, the helicopter simulators on the market do okay, I guess, But that's not where the bang for the buck is in these helicopter simulators. I mean, here's an interesting look. I think this is a student who is burning avgas, trying to learn how to hover this this helicopter. Now, the standard approach to simulate motion is to, I know this is mesmerizing watching this. Now this helicopter, this is a Robinson, and this helicopter, I believe, runs between $300 and $400 an hour to rent. So he's burning, you know, $300 or $400 an hour. And this helicopter is probably about $2,000 an hour. And here's a student trying to learn how to get this under control. You're going to see him land here in a minute, and he didn't mean to. Yeah, there you go. See, so as with the bicycle rider, the pilot's vestibular system detects, you know, accelerations before the aircraft instruments can actually display them. So the aircraft instruments are always lagging, and this is considered an inner control loop in which the pilot can respond actually to accelerations that occur in full motion simulators or in the actual aircraft, but he can't do it in fixed base simulators. I mean, this means that if done properly, there's an indisputably positive training transfer when transitioning from a motion-based simulator to an aircraft. And this is particularly true when you're designing a simulator for an aircraft where the pilot's sense of balance is the primary input for control, like helicopters. But it's also true for any other vehicle capable of moving through multiple axes all at the same time, like airplanes. You know, it might be worth going off topic here for just a second to point out that a helicopter simulator also needs superior visuals and control loading in the cyclic to be actually worth a darn. And most of the simulators on the market use projection systems for visual displays on the helicopters. And the problem, of course, with projection systems is they distort badly at the edges, making it impossible to tell how far away the skids are from the ground. And most don't have control loading in the cyclic, which is the pilot's best measure of the aerodynamic forces that are working on the helicopter. So if motion then is the necessary part of a competently designed system and constructed training system, then the next question has to be, is it worth the additional cost? Well, calculating value in terms of hard cash return on investment is comparatively easy to determine simply by selecting a maneuver and then training to proficiency in the aircraft with some students as a baseline, and then practicing to proficiency in the simulator, making the transition to the helicopter, and then you see what happens. Now, this is the helicopter I learned to fly in. And Roger Sharp, and I sat next to each other in this little tiny cockpit with the doors off, and about half of our bodies stuck out of each side of the helicopter when we were flying. And it's a great little training helicopter, but it runs about $360 an hour to rent this. And that's roughly three times the cost of a 172. Now, I want to tell you, after 3 of the most excruciating days of my life, I wanted to quit every moment I was in that helicopter. I was able to, and about 8 hours on the Hobbs meter, I was able to get this Schweitzer into a hover. And to this day, I can't tell you why I can get that helicopter into a hover. You just go to bed one night, you wake up the next morning, and for some reason you can hover it. I don't know. Now, I have to admit, I'm not the most coordinated human being on the planet, but I'm not Joe Cocker either, okay? That sort of hover I got that helicopter into cost me $2,800, excluding the instructor cost. And Roger's rates are ridiculously high. What can I tell you? You know, I mean, what if we could train a pilot to a hover in a simulator in, let's say, half the time? So we train them to proficiency in the simulator, which has an operating cost of about $1 an hour. And then we can transition to a helicopter, and let's say it takes a whole 4 hours to get him to a hover in the real helicopter. Well, we just saved that pilot $3,000. Now that is real fast return, and that's why motion and the effort to build a simulator that can train those kinds of things is really important. You know, as we think about that device in the back of the room there, that's not ready for prime time. It's getting close. 2 years ago, I would have given you a 20% chance we could get that. Right now, I'm giving us a 90% chance. And you know, we're thinking that we might not even bother certifying it. Just like the crosswind trainer, that device back there is probably shouldn't even be called a simulator. It should be called a trainer, because the economic value of a device like that is so much. It is everything a school needs in order to make something like that work. Now, if you're going to train pilots in a $1,000 an hour helicopter, it's even a bigger deal. So that's why we continue to pursue it. But in the face of that kind of evidence, the obviousness of the value of motion, it's amazing to me that every once in a while somebody will still come up to me and say, motion simulation, nah, we don't need it, or here's why it's not important. So the question, enough about helicopters. So what about airplanes for a second? The good news is that there's a lot of evidence in favor of motion, and it comes kind of in all three flavors, namely physical evidence, testimonial evidence, and what I consider to be circumstantial evidence about motion. When we opened the Skyport Laboratory in 2012, the list of experiments that we, of course, and because of what happened last year, we immediately undertook this question of studying motion. Which provided us with a baseline, of cost for training and time and so on and so forth. And we knew about the terrible. Everybody knows about the terrible statistics we've seen, regarding retentions, and the numbers were frankly so surprisingly large that the work we were doing here in terms of understanding that felt a little bit more like a public service, frankly, than an experiment. But the centerpiece involved training students to proficiency in a wide range of maneuvers in full motion simulators and then measuring the time to proficiency once they got good in the motion simulator to the airplane. And they were a mix, and this is important, they were a mix of maneuvers that were selected that are particularly well suited to take advantage of motion cues, such as things like steep turns and stalls and spins and crosswind landings. And then there were things that were kind of less, where motion might have seemed even less important, like short field takeoffs and other maneuvers not normally associated with motion cues. And the two most notable findings were that, first, the time to proficiency dropped not only on those things where maneuvers were helped by getting motion cues, but also on that second category. So while the total training time, including hours in the motion simulator and hours in the airplane in total, did not drop, we're still spending as much time training to proficiency. The amount of time in the airplane was cut substantially, reducing the cost of a private pilot certificate by about $4,000. And it's because we are cueing students to feel motions or to feel a change of some kind, either in the airplane or in the maneuver, that will not show up on the instruments for maybe another second. So it isn't that they necessarily fly better because they're used to motion, but they fly better because they know what a motion should cause them to do. So I'm getting this motion, I better go over and look here at the altimeter, or I better go over and look at the VSI. And all of those things came true. So in short, the more realistic the simulation, the more effective it was, as a training device. And this, like I say, this notion seems so intuitively obvious to me that it's hard to believe that it even required a study. And it kind of goes directly to the heart of this long-held belief of ours that simulation is in some ways theater. It's a suspension of disbelief, because the more realistic the simulation, the faster the student is able to prepare. the more engaged they are in the training, the more they believe. And by the way, as sweaty as some pilots are when they get out of an airplane, they're just as sweaty when they get out of the simulator if the simulators are good. One other bit of evidence that comes under the kind of heading of circumstantial evidence is that flight schools survive only as long as there's a steady stream of new wannabe pilots to train. And customer recruiting or student recruiting and retention has become, and maybe it always was, a core competency for any successful program. A couple of years after Redbird started shipping the FMX full motion simulator, we identified a phenomenon that we later dubbed the Redbird effect. And in short, the Redbird effect occurs at airports that have more than one flight school. And when one flight school buys a Redbird FMX, all of the other flight schools at that airport that can afford it will buy an FMX. And the reason is simple. In competitive situations, motion simulation bestows competitive advantage. And it's because this is what the consumer, and in this case, the student, wants. And who's to say they're wrong? I mean, trot out your fat logbook and your hand-picked studies and tell the student that motion doesn't matter, and see what the student says. Students pay obscene amounts of money for a pilot's license today. Tell them that they don't deserve the best, most effective technology we can give them. Tell them that they, that they deserve something less than we can provide. So, tell them they don't need to be as safe as we have the tools to make them, and see what they say. They deserve something that makes the skill of flying an unforgettable and permanent part of who they are. Like learning to ride a bike. Thank you all very much for your attention. I appreciate it very much.